Hey entrepreneurs, have you ever wondered from time to time why your message might fall flat with an audience who you're speaking to? Our guest today, Jill Diamond, is an English communication confidence coach. She's also a business owner. She's been doing this for 20 years, and she teaches entrepreneurs how to match their communication style with their experience. On this podcast, she shares with us what are the most common mistakes that entrepreneurs make when they're communicating. We asked Jill, when she envisions a really successful entrepreneur, what do they look like? What do they sound like in their communication? And she answers that question. Great communication tips coming from Jill Diamond. Jill, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Rich, and hi, John.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. If you could give us a little bit of an intro of your entrepreneurial journey and how you've come to where you are, would be great to start us off.
Sure. I love that question. I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. However, I'm an artist. And so when I was growing up, my father only wanted me to join the family business, but I didn't want to do that because I'm an artist, right? So I had that whole free spirit thing going on. And I did it took me a while to kind of go through college, get a graduate degree. I was still performing on the West Coast, the East Coast, kind of trying to figure out where to land. And as I said, because of my creative roots, I didn't really think business was something I wanted to do. And I didn't realize until much later how creative business actually can be. Right. I see you nodding your head. But so what happened for me was I had an incident, an unfortunate robbery happened that led me to say, Jill, you're almost 30 years old. Maybe it's time for you to get serious. Think about another avenue. How can you take your passion for what you do and how can you put it into a business? I had a friend who'd been asking me continuously to join him to start a language school. And I didn't want to teach English. So again, I was like, well, that's not for me. Eventually, after I had this incident, I said, maybe I could carve out a niche here for me, partner up with this friend of mine and teach communication skills. And so that my journey was going through the arts and getting an education that taught me how to use the arts as a tool. And then eventually, when kind of push came to shove and this unfortunate thing happened, I jumped in fully and actually quit my part-time job and just jumped in and started to make the engine work. Yeah.
I'd be curious for you to elaborate on pretty substantial pivot point for you on the robbery. I don't need to know the details of the robbery, but some of the emotional journey, I guess I'm not connecting the dot between, I got robbed. Now I need to figure out how to get my passion in the business. Can you connect that for us?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. I had a record release that night. So I was performing in Manhattan. I had released a new album, right? Self-produced and released. And I was really high, feeling great, right? Feeling awesome. What a great day this is. But it's a struggle to be a performer, as you know. And it wasn't just because I released an album, doesn't mean there was a lot of money associated with that. And I came home, and as we were walking in the door, me, my mother, and my guitar player and boyfriend at the time, this robbery took place. And during the 2 hours that happened in the apartment with us in there, I had a lot of thoughts going through my head. And I just, when I came out of it, it just shook me. And I just kind of felt like I want to have something good to rob, I guess. I never thought that until now, but I don't want anybody to get robbed. But the point was that it just kind of was like, it's time to take this passion and get serious about life. This is really what it was.
Okay. And when you had said artist, I was picturing something else. You like a performing artist. You were a singer?
Performing artist. I was a singer and songwriter in Manhattan. I was an actress. Lived in Los Angeles and New York, pursuing both of those avenues.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then connect for us the passion around language with artistry, and then how ultimately that shifted to something with business, would you?
When I got my master's degree, again, still kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I did get a master's in creative arts and learning. So it was, okay, this is what I'm passionate about. Music, I'm passionate about writing, I'm passionate about theater. What can I do with that? And so by the time I had taken all the courses in university, it was time to write a thesis paper. And I fell into teaching ESL. I got, hey, I got something you could do. One of my professors said there was an opening at this Japanese college outside of Boston. And so I said, yeah, okay, if I can sing and do theater with them. I mean, I don't want to really teach English. Again, I just had it in my head that wasn't something I wanted to do. And so the connection was that I could do it by singing songs with these folks, getting them to stand on a stage, make gestures, add a word, add a phrase. I mean, these kids were 18, 19 years old, but they didn't speak a lick of English. They understood it, but they weren't confident. And what I did was I helped them to bridge take their fear and kind of lead them into the language through the arts.
That's great. And you had said you use it earlier, you said you use the arts as a tool. Can you expand on that?
Absolutely. So if you need to give a presentation, we can prepare you for that. However, what about those questions that come that you might not want to answer at the end of the presentation? How can we prepare you for the impromptu? How do we use improvisation, which stems from theater and comedy? How do I give you those speaking tools, the thinking on your feet tools that you need in order to be able to answer those difficult questions? So that's one example, using improv as a tool to just build your confidence, deal with your nerves.
It strikes me on a couple of points here that I really love. And we had a guest that came on our episode, Jill. His name was C Rock, and he just had a book that recently came out. So if you listen to C Rock episode, the book just came out called Rocket Fuel. And there was something in his life that triggered him to go, I got to use this as fuel to then take me to the next level. So when you tell your story about being in the apartment, being robbed, you're kind of sitting there, and that moment gave you kind of this paradigm shift, this movement to what you want to do next. So take us a little bit now to, that was, I believe, 1997. It was a while ago that happened. So you've been running your business now for a good period of time. What have you done in your business since then? I mean, you talked about the types of things you help people with, but talk to us about your business now. And you mentioned earlier you had an office in Brazil, potentially. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing globally today with your business?
Yeah, sure. So the business started, I'll come to where we're at, but because we work internationally, we were all over the world doing our trainings, starting in like 1999. I would say the first couple of years we were still kind of figuring it out, but by 99 we were all over the globe, flying our trainers all over and doing trainings all over the world. Mm-hmm. And so then 2010 happens, you get this recession, and all of a sudden the office has to downsize. We got a call 2 weeks before we were supposed to go to Dubai. We were supposed to be there for 2 weeks and do training. So all of a sudden there's this shift that's happening in training and development.
Yeah.
And so we had to rethink. We had to move to home office. I downsized the office and started to do more webinars and online training and so forth. And so where the company is today is I'm very focused on the primary coach. I'm very selective in the corporate coaching that I do. I've also created an online course, an online program, so that I can start to make money while I sleep, which of course you probably have seen the rage that's been happening. But people, if you have any idea in your head how to make a better pound cake,
Hmm.
whatever the idea is, you can sell it if you understand marketing and you're willing to put in the work
Sure.
through these online platforms. So I have my online program. I still do my corporate training, and I live between Brazil and New York, and do most of my work online these days.
Awesome. So, give me an example for entrepreneurs that are listening to this episode. I was telling Rich before I got on this episode, I got to be on my best behavior here today in terms of communications, because we got a communications person coming on, and certainly know that you can quickly help entrepreneurs with their communication methodology, I should say. Whether it be a presentation or whether it be even conversational keynotes or whatever it may be. Talk to us about what are some of the key mistakes that entrepreneurs make in their communication habits or communication styles that you experience?
I would say the first thing that comes to mind is they overspeak, right?
Okay,
I'm an
tell me more.
expert. I got a lot to say. Let me say it all. One of the things that I think is really important, whether you're pitching an idea or whether you're giving obviously when you're giving a presentation, you know how many minutes you have and you prepare for that. But, quite often, whether you're having a discussion with someone who's going to lend you some money, or you are looking for a partner, or whatever it might be, we overspeak because, we feel like we need to make our point. And I think it's really important to know what the key points are, but you always have to keep some really great ideas in your pocket, because you're going to be asked questions. So when you have those already great remarks that you really want to say up front, but if you save them, you're going to find a place to plug them in. And it really helps with the impromptu and unprepared components of our conversations.
Yeah, and then it's interesting you mentioned that. Like when you say overspeak, I initially think to I'm speaking in the presentation, but there's also the written overspeak. And what I mean by that is a lot of organizations now, I'd be curious as to your take, are recommending against the 55 PowerPoint slide presentation that has all the answers in it because everybody's dozing at the back of the room, versus a more engaging presentation style, right? And you can overspeak even with the words on the slides sometimes, versus
Absolutely.
less is more. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Absolutely, less is more. It's about
Yeah.
how to streamline the message. And if you're going to talk about a deck, I mean, I'm that component, the person who's going to tell you that you need a slide that has a lot of white space around it with some nice bullet points and maybe an image, and then go to the next slide. Even if you need to break up that idea into separate slides.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about this idea of white space. When you speak, not only do you, this is another second point. So one, overspeak. Two, forgetting the punctuation in your voice. When you speak, you need to create white space, just like you do on that PowerPoint slide. So it's like, here's the canvas, it's white. I'm going to speak on top of it. My words are going to fill it up, but I'm going to remember where to pause. I'm going to add a comma with my voice. I'm going to put a period there. And then I can emphasize a word and deliver it to you as the listener. So I become much more effective when I remember how to speak and pause, speak and pause.
I remember, Rich, I'm sure you remember this because this was something we did back right out of college when we were working together, is we used to study pastors in the church and how they would communicate and accentuate what they were trying to say to their audience. And you remember that, Rich? We used to do that. And that's a little bit what you're talking about now is some of the best public speakers in the world. They'll have you hanging on that next word that's going to come out.
Preach. Yeah, they're preachers.
Yeah, right?
That's the passion.
Jill, I'm curious if we start on the first mistake is that they overspeak. For our listeners that are hearing that, they go, okay, got it. Less is more. I need to say and use less words. How? Beyond that, is there a construct? Is there a framework? Is there something as someone is communicating to think of, okay, my time is up. If I keep going, I will have overspoken. Like, how?
Yeah,
what do they do?
Great. Yeah, right. Aside from exercises that I take people through, here's a really great one. Are you bored with yourself? Because, and what do I mean? If I'm talking and if I'm getting lost, if I'm bored, because if I don't even know where I am, I don't know what I'm saying. Those are all cues that you've got to wrap it up. I mean, we've all felt that way. Have either of you felt that way? Like, where am I going with this? Or
Absolutely.
look at that look on their face. They're not following me. Okay, wrap it up.
I love that if you're getting lost. And from time to time, I can find myself getting lost. And from time to time, when I'm listening to someone, they will sometimes say, I forget where I was going. And when we get that, what I'm hearing from you is when we get that feeling like, I kind of forget where I was going here. Like that may be the time to hand the microphone over and let somebody else take over.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Because we don't want to get ourselves in deep water. We want to stay here. And it's interesting, when we pause and we breathe, we will remember that important number we were forgetting, or that important point that we were walking towards with our speech. So pausing and breathing is going to help us communicate and hopefully get ultimately what we want from the conversation.
We know, I'd imagine all of our entrepreneurs would like to be great leaders. And some of them feel they're already there. Some of them feel they have some work to do. Regardless of where someone is, part of leadership is communication. Yeah. And one thing that we notice about people when we're listening to them is the use of filler words. Or drawing. One thing that I had to get rid of was drawing a word out. And that was a way to buy more time for my thoughts.
It's a good technique.
It's a good technique as a filler word. So what would be a recommendation you would have if you were coaching somebody who had a lot of filler words in their communication, whether it be one-on-one or on stage? What is a way to reduce filler words?
As a practice exercise?
Yeah.
I mean, because you need to write anything you want to get better at comes from just having a tool, a practice, something you can practice to then remember.
Can you do an exercise with John and me that we could do spontaneously? And if not, that's okay. Happy to hear your answer regardless.
Well, so what I was going to say is reading. So when you read out loud and you practice pausing, so how do you anticipate where the pause is, whether it's an actual punctuation mark or it's after a noun or a verb or an adjective, which is a more important word, right? So reading out loud is a really key way to improve your pausing and to not use fillers. As you know, there's an app out there. I think it's only available for iPhone, and it might be called I think and it counts your ums and your nos. So that it's not available on Android, but it is available on Apple. So that's another great tool.
Usually, I think the big thing too, Jill, though, is you said it earlier. Be okay with white space. And if you're not okay with white space, because I feel if I'm going to pause right now, you guys are going to interrupt me and take over my stage, then I fill it. I fill it with these words, right? But if I know that you guys are going to respect my thought process and I use the right punctuation to let you know that something might be coming, you're going to wait for that. So a mixture, like what you said earlier, a mixture of white space and punctuation can almost help eliminate those filler words, right?
They eliminate the filler words because you've just emphasized a word, which then buys you time, right? But the other thing you said that is so important, and I've had clients tell me this, well, but if I pause, people are going to interrupt me. Yeah. Not if you do it the way you just demonstrated, John. Not if you do it with the passion on that word, with that silence. But I also want to point something out to you, and I'll be happy to send you the link if you want to share it in your description of today's podcast. But there are also studies that have shown that there are appropriate times to say or ah, because what it indicates is that an important word is coming. And it was a study that was done. It showed that children who are learning words, they actually can learn, they remember the words that come after the ums and the fillers better. Fascinating. Now that's when the and the ah is followed by an important word, right? If I'm trying to remember a 5-syllable important word like entrepreneur, right? If I'm trying to remember an important word, but it's not coming to me, and I know it's going to have an impact on your understanding of what I'm talking about. So if I say entrepreneur, you're going to remember that. So it's not always a terrible thing.
That is
I've never considered the use of placed importance on what's going to happen next. From time to time, I will use only to convey, frankly, uncertainty, because I've learned a communication style that exudes confidence even when I'm just being creative. So there are times that I'm careful of my language and I'll use a filler word to demonstrate I'm just being creative here. Like I may express myself confidently, but I'm not quite sure where I want to go for sure, but here's what I'm thinking.
Absolutely. And again, I think that what I learned from this study that I watched, and again, I'll share the link with you, that sometimes it's okay. Yep. You know, the idea is that the overall presence that you're communicating is I got this.
Yep.
Right? That right? Entrepreneurs need that.
Yeah. So I want to make sure, Jill, we're not missing a few of these because we kind of got on a little tangent there. But I asked initially, what are some mistakes that entrepreneurs made? And if I recap, you said they overspeak.
Yep.
And the second one is they don't use punctuation in their voice.
Right.
Are there others that you see common that come around more often than not? Or are those the two biggest?
I think those are pretty, I would say, across the board. And again, we're talking about in communication, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing that a lot of speakers, unless they're trained, a challenge they have is using intonation or melody in their voice. So when we go for that pause, and then we go for that emphasis of a word, which you demonstrated so nicely, one of the ways that we emphasize is it's not about volume. I got to scream to get the attention, because sometimes I can get your attention by bringing my voice low, right? I don't always have to be loud. But if I use melody and I go a little higher than I might normally think is appropriate, then I grab a word and I grab your attention. A lot of people are more monotone. They're a little safe. They don't want to take that chance. They don't want to be that orator, that preacher, if you will. But again, you're an entrepreneur. You're selling something, and you're the one. You're the brand. You're the flag. So you have to get as many speaking tricks as you can, and another one is intonation and melody.
Is there a practice exercise you'd recommend if somebody wants to practice with their intonation and melody?
Sure. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel, but one that comes to mind right off the top of my head is imagining a siren, the sound of a yay, and kind of playing on the vowels with the movement of the voice, mimicking a siren.
You had said you had some on your YouTube channel. Feel free to make a plug for it for our users to move over there. How would they find you?
Sure. Yeah. So that's the by Jill Diamond. Sorry, I think it's just Jill Diamond, but if it's okay, I'd rather send it to you. I recently changed it, so I can't remember if I changed it to by Jill Diamond or Jill Diamond, but I've got a big following over there. I've got a lot of great stuff related to melody. It's one of the things that I think I do differently in my communication work.
And then the online course, I'd love for you to get a plug on that too. If people wanted to find it, how would they?
It's not a private platform, but if they search for Find Your Stage with English Communication Confidence, that is the name of that. Find Your Stage with English Communication Confidence. That's the name of that program.
Okay.
And it's all over my LinkedIn page as well. So my profile and my LinkedIn page.
So if I talk to you about a persona, I would love for you to reflect back to me what you envision in the speaking style and the physicality and the voice and the words. And the persona would be a successful entrepreneur who is known as a visionary and a leader and who inspires confidence. Can you talk to us in your mind as a communications expert about what does that physicality look like of that persona? What does the voice sound like, and what's the words sound like also?
Sure. The first thing that comes to my mind is posture, how we sit and how we stand, and are our shoulders hunched, or are they down our back? So the first thing we see is posture. I would say the second thing is eye contact, so that even as I talk to you here on the video, I'm doing my best when I'm trying to make my point to look into the camera instead of at you. And so as I look at you and my eyes are moving all over, right? So it's about getting very solid in your stance and your posture, so that you're not rocking, right? We don't want that. And then really looking into the camera or the person's eyes. I would say that would be a physical component that's really important. Says a lot about someone's confidence. When it comes to the voice, the number one thing, and again, this is going to depend on the age. I think younger generations today have been trained, and they've from our culture, from certain parts of the country like California, have learned to bring their intonation up at the end of their sentences. When you make a statement, when you're making a point, when you're selling an idea, when you're not asking a question, you need to make sure your intonation comes down at the end of your statement and at the end of your phrases. Because if I talk to you like this, and every point I make, I bring the tone up. Can you hear what I'm doing differently? Right?
Yes.
As soon as I do that, is she asking me a question? Does she know what she's talking about? So I would say, vocally speaking, remember to bring your intonation down when you're having a very important conversation. Yeah.
Jill, on the same note of tone and how you provide a message, like we all know these days that I could send Rich a text message that says, beautiful day outside, and he thinks that I'm upset for some reason, because you can't read tone in a text message or an email.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times entrepreneurs, I certainly have been in this position myself, I send someone an email, or I send somebody a text, or I even say something verbally to them that comes across the wrong way. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you can make sure your communication gets perceived the right way on the other side, but then also give us a couple of examples of conflict? If an entrepreneur is in a conflict situation, what is the best way to use your maybe your melody or your tonality or your punctuation to bring that temperature down a little bit and provide a little more empathy to the conversation in a moment of conflict?
Okay, so let's start with, I'm going to go to the point about how to make sure you don't put emotion into, and I'm just going to take an email, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So when the first thing that I do when I'm writing is I do not put the person's name in the to until I've finished the email.
Yep, good idea.
Okay, number one, don't put the person's name there. Don't do it. Number two, if you're feeling emotional about it, you could write in red on the top before you start writing, something in red like draft, like just something that you can't send because there's a big red something that says draft. You don't have to do that, but start writing your email and say everything you want to say, like all the emotional stuff. Get it out, because if you don't get it out, it's there. So write it. And then go back and edit. The biggest thing about writing and texting, especially texting, is we're just very impulsive.
Yep.
So if it's an email especially, don't put the person's name in there yet. Possibly put a little sign so you remember not to send it until you take that out. But more importantly, get everything out that you feel that you want to say, but go back and edit it. Take out all that stuff and make it nice. And then, the question I think you're saying, so how do I make it nice? Right?
Yeah.
One of the ways
even if I'm not mad, maybe how can I make sure that my messages, whether it be verbal or written, don't come across the wrong way on the other side?
Yeah. One, you have to reread before you send. That's like a no-brainer 101, don't send anything until you read it. But if you're communicating, another thing you can think about is the language, right? So in other words, when we add what we call modal verbs, whether it's would or might or can, those types of words tend to soften our communication in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
In a good way. I'm working with a gentleman right now. They love him, executive at an important company, and but he's harsh and he's very, very direct, and that doesn't always work. People don't always want to help you, even if they like you, if you don't get the message out in a way that sounds like you're being inclusive. This is a conversation. So adding those, even just adding those helping verbs or modal verbs, kind of softens the tone a little bit.
I have never heard the term modal verbs. Can you give us a few examples?
Yes, can, might. There's should and would, but those aren't necessarily, should doesn't soften anything, but must and will and can and do. A modal verb is the verb that comes before the main verb, right? So what we might want to do instead of what we will do, what we should do.
Or
so the will and the should and the
like that would be an example of a strong modal verb that could be softened by what you may want to do.
Right, what you may want to do instead of what you need to do. Exactly.
Got it.
What you need is the verb, and what you can do. There it is. Right, what you can do. There's your modal, can.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Did I answer that question, John?
Yeah, no, I think it was good. I think this is so important to reflect upon. I think with the stuff you're talking about, we, in today's fast world, we just communicate, a lot of texts I don't resend, they have iPhone spelling mistakes in it because I don't correct the iPhone autocorrect by the time it's sent. And I'm like, oh man, sometimes I send a text message 3 times, I got to correct the spelling all 3 times because iPhone tried to autocorrect it. So being more patient, ultimately, even the email, to your point, one of the tricks that I learned over time that's similar to yours is write that email, put it in your drafts, and come back to it tomorrow. Because maybe tomorrow, and the amount of times I've done that and not actually sent the email has been phenomenal.
Exactly.
Right. So things like that. And then as far as voice, one of the things you're talking about here today that reminds me, and Rich, we used to talk a little about this too, is to match and lead. If somebody's heated at you, or how can you just kind of take the tone down by potentially matching them a little bit with your tone, but then bringing it all the way back down, because there's no need for us to get upset here today.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
So all those techniques are all stuff that's very helpful, but there's a lot of good components you're talking about here that I think add to the repertoire of what we should be doing that I'd love to put in practice myself.
Good. That's
Jill,
nice.
I'd like to preface my next question for our listeners by saying I had asked you, I may inquire about this, about any unique challenges that you may have experienced as a woman-owned business that you'd be willing to share with our listeners and we may be able to expand on.
It's interesting. I've gotten asked this question before, and when you say any challenges, I don't actually look through that lens of I'm a woman. I know that I'm a woman, but I don't look at as I'm a female entrepreneur. And so for that reason, I don't experience a lot of challenges because I don't think of myself that way. But what I want to say is that perhaps one of the reasons I feel extra confident is because I've been a part of female entrepreneurial groups. And so when you are part of a group of women who are entrepreneurs, especially those women who were 10 or 15, maybe even 20 years ahead of you, I had a lot of mentors. I had a lot of females entrepreneurs who I learned from. And it just said, so I could see myself there in 10 years or 20 years, because there they were winning awards and making millions of dollars and with the president and all of these crazy things that, just all of a sudden seemed within reach.
You said you had a lot of mentors and a lot of them were female and entrepreneurs. Would love to hear a story about one or two of them, and even by name, if you'd be willing to share. Feel free to forward the podcast to them as a shout out to them, but would love to know maybe a specific story or two about something you learned from one of your female mentors.
Yeah, look, I mean, were they official mentors? No, they were part of this group. They were 10 or 15 years older than me, or 10 or 15 years ahead of me in business. And a lot of what I learned, quite frankly, was through observation. I did become friendly with some of them. And I think I learned a lot about patience. You said that earlier, John.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if there's one thing that I've learned being an entrepreneur, and certainly by watching these women who have paved the way, it's patience. You know, you might want to close that deal right now because you need that extra 50K in your bank, but that's not going to happen just because that's what you need. So you have to keep your desperation out of it. Take your desperation out of the equation, and let's look at what does patience do for you. It helps you think. And again, these are things that I learned by watching some of these mentors who are older than me, right, and who were in business longer than me. It wasn't overnight success. It's not overnight success. So it's about, you have to watch people you admire, and you have to be patient with yourself and try to keep that desperation out of the equation when it comes to closing the deals and moving your business forward.
Thank you for that.
Mm.
Can you share with us a time when you were particularly challenged in your business, or you felt like, you know, the learning curve, everybody gets to the bottom at some point and questions like, should I continue on? And is this for me? And is it worth rebuilding after something has fallen down? Can you share with us a time where you struggled in building your business and how you made your way out of that?
Yeah, look, that's a really important question. I can think of many, but the biggest one that comes to my mind is I did start my business with a business partner. And the only reason I went into business was because he was fun. And I said, well, I got nothing to lose. So having a business partner is fantastic when you start a business. After a few years, it's not always so fun to have a business partner. Am I right?
Yeah, we've been there.
Right. So I got to the point where my head was going this way, his was going that way. We had an office in Paris, an office in New York, and we didn't see the growth of the business go in the same direction. It was very difficult for me to stick with what I knew, that this is not right for me. Now, I happen to have waited a little too long. I would say maybe a year too long, and I should have acted sooner. But by the time I finally couldn't go another day, a lot of the communication and a lot of the separation, the lawyers and me deciding I needed to pay him when there wasn't that kind of value on the business at that point. There were a lot of hurdles to get over to finally separate from my business partner. And I think, you know, if I'm not mistaken, you said, well, so how did you get over that?
Yeah.
How did you get through? How did you bring the business? Yeah. So I think it was because I had a vision. You know, I had a really clear vision that told me that who I wanted my audience to be, you know, how I wanted to help them, and that I felt very confident in my decision making. I didn't need somebody to help me make those decisions anymore. So that propelled me. I think it was just an inner knowing that it was time. I had to take the chance, and that I was gonna succeed because I had a vision.
And you had said you had clarity on who was your audience and how to help them. I'm curious, with an audience of entrepreneurs who are listening to you, would you mind giving some insight on maybe the last, I don't know, 3 to 5 jobs that you've had that an entrepreneur has hired you for? What has that looked like over the last few times you've been hired by an entrepreneur in terms of services that you would provide they hired you for?
Mostly I'm working with leaders. Okay. Every once in a while, I'll get an independent entrepreneur who I'm working with. But what do I get hired to help them with? Can we match their communication style with their experience level and their know-how? Because their message is falling flat. And again, all of the things I said, maybe they're not engaging with the intonation in their voice. Maybe they're speaking too quickly. Maybe they don't have enough variety in their voice. Most people, when they think about communication, they're thinking writing, they think about the message. People don't necessarily think about the voice. That's my specialty, helping people with the delivery vocally, vocal presence. So that's really, I just got hired to work with an international, couple people out of Mexico who are leaders, head of supply chain, head of human resources. English is a second language. They do business in English, but they need to come to me to kind of boost their confidence so that they can say, I can do this in English. I can do this in English.
Yep.
So that's, yeah.
Thank you. And how many languages are you fluent in that you use as an expertise?
2, I would say, Portuguese and English.
Okay.
I was going to start talking French, so I was just going to see if we could.
I know a little.
Super.
So, but so because I'm not teaching English, right? It's interesting. I never use the native language when I'm helping people. They speak fluently in English, and it's really just about the rhythm of the language, the flow of the language, the confidence that goes inside of understanding how to communicate it.
As we look to wrap up here, curious on any final thoughts or message that you might have, or anything that you want to ensure that our audience knows about your work.
About my work? Well, look, just regarding my work, I'm really passionate about communication. I hope I've shared my passion with both of you today. I think, take your time to listen to yourself. If I have to give a tip to you, to record your voice, get comfortable with your voice, listen back to your voice. Does it find people that you admire as speakers, start to mimic. I always say, if you can find 3 different speakers who you admire, and then you kind of piece together why you admire them, you get you, right? I don't think we would all choose the same 3 speakers. So what I do is I help you to feel confident and effective in your communication. That's what I do. So if anybody needs that, of course I'd love to help. But beyond that, I just want to say to the entrepreneurs out there, keep your vision clear, write it again and again and again until it gets clearer, and then persevere, have patience.
Yeah, that's great. And certainly gave us a big challenge too, because anytime I listen to myself or people listen to themselves, they have a very hard time connecting with their own voice, because it sounds a lot different than you think it sounds. And
Yes.
That's another reason why a good communication coach can really help you through some of that, so you don't have to do it all on your own. It makes it a lot easier to have that third party.
Yeah, and I think I just want to just quickly, I know we're wrapping up, but voice matters. And, you were asking me about, if you imagine a leader and what they look like, what they sound like, and how they stand, just think, when you listen back to your voice, does your voice match what you look like and the words that you're using? Are you talking in a key that might not be appropriate for what people would expect from you? So again, we want there to be a cohesion between your voice, your message, your experience, what you look like, all of those things.
And a coach and a keen eye on it certainly helps. Thank you for joining us today, Jill.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Stick around with Rich and I for a few more minutes while we break down the podcast.
John, there's an app, I think that counts the number of I think in knows. I definitely want to download that. I'd like to use it as I'm on the phone all day long for my job. I'm on these video calls, right? I would love to know, how many times do I say it? I don't know that I'm fully conscious of it. I think the majority of that I have flushed out with intention over the years, but I certainly think that would be cool to run in the background.
Don't you? I don't know if this happened to you or not. I can remember being in Itasca, Illinois, running what we called TSA or TSB, training session A or training session B. And we used to self-evaluate each other as peers, not self-evaluate, but we used to do peer evaluations of each other doing our presentations. And I can remember multiple times being caught on, John, did you know you said 23 times? And it quickly got my communication cleaned up a little bit on those filler words, because we would track things like that as a peer. But that app does the same thing. As I just said, that app does the same thing in you. But I don't think you need to overthink it. I think what she talked about is you also can sometimes use it to legitimately emphasize what's coming up next, if you have to go back in your brain to think about what that word is that you're looking for, it can also emphasize it. So I don't think we should be overthinking it. I think if you're a keynote speaker talking to tens of thousands of people on podcasts or on keynote presentations live, hopefully sometime soon in the future, maybe then you should be focused on it. But I don't think that the average entrepreneur needs to worry about that right now. It's more important to think about the not overspeak. That's a huge one. And the other thing you talked about was punctuation in your voice. You talked about a lot of other things that I think you're more experienced than I am, certainly with intonation, tonality, melody. I mean, you used to be an expert and give classes on that. Sometimes we used to do some sales presentations. You used to have a whole communications component that I think Jill touched on a lot of that stuff and added a lot of stuff to that.
I certainly enjoy trying to communicate well, and it's definitely a practice. I don't think you ever get there. I certainly don't think I'm definitely there. The first thing that she brought up when you asked her that question about a common mistake that people make, I'd absolutely tell on myself on the over speaking. I do that because I tend to have a preference for thoroughness, and I want to make sure the central point that I'm trying to communicate, sometimes I'll over triangulate access to what I'm trying to communicate, and it's ad nauseum, and I'm burning people's ears to do it. And I can hear myself sometimes on this podcast when I'm asking questions. Sometimes I don't end in a strong way, and I'll kind of trail off or rephrase the question a second time. That's really unnecessary. So that'd be something that I would kind of tell on myself about something in my communication style I'm aware of and working on. Is there anything about yours that you're aware of and working on? And then the last thing I do is challenge our entrepreneurs who are listeners to tap into anything and just self-reflect anything that they're aware of. Is there anything you're aware of and working on?
Certainly, I connect to yours as well, where sometimes you're speaking, you had a clear thought when you started speaking, and then you get middle through what you're trying to say, and you're bumbling it a little bit, and you got to regroup and bring it back. That's something I'd love to work on, and I think it's a continuous improvement. One of the areas that I think came into this a lot, above and beyond overspeak, is, to me, the patience. She talked about patience in business, but there's also patience in communication. Way too often, we respond too quickly. And that's something that I've been working on a lot. I get an email, I feel I got to respond. I get a text message, I feel I got to respond. I get a phone call, I feel I got to return the call. I may not be in the right framework. I may not have thought about the conversation, and I call them back, or I write the email back without too much forethought, but I'm trying to get it out too quick. I don't say things the way I want to say it. It comes across wrong. So I think patience is what I'm trying to work on actively. And it's very difficult because I don't like emails in my inbox. I don't like text messages sitting there unread or unresponded to. It drives me bananas. But if I can execute more patience, I think I'll communicate clearly.
I would connect patience for me, that other word that she said on observation and patience. And then as I was listening and thinking, that observation and patience, I have a particular friend of mine who I won't name by name, but this friend of mine listens, and then I pause, and he doesn't pick up the microphone when I pause immediately. And often there's something else I wanted to share. I go into a different area. And I had mentioned to him that he is one of the most fantastic listeners that I've ever had in my life, because when I take a breath, he doesn't take over. And it's something that I'd like to also be a better listener, and I'd like to practice observation and actually getting into what the other person is saying without having the felt need to have to relate as soon as they pause, or I want to say something smart, or here's something, or I'm recycling what I'm going to say next, and just be in the mode of observation of what's being communicated to me and being patient. And sometimes I find when I do that, if someone then puts a microphone down and they pause, it takes me a minute to have to collect my thoughts because I haven't been rehearsing what I'm going to say next. I'm actually listening. Look at you.
You like the way I'm observing?
Notice that.
You're like, are you going to talk next? I'm like, no, I'm observing. Listen, you're 100% right, Rich. Way too many times you're talking to somebody and they're thinking about what they're going to talk about next, not listening to what you, and look at this guy. I do. That's another thing I probably need to work on, because you want to be engaging, you want to respond, you want to show them that you're engaged in the conversation. But if you're thinking about what you're going to talk about next, you're not really listening, and so you get in this vicious loop that is very difficult. Which is also combined with multitasking. You know, you're having a conference call and people are checking their emails and they're doing other things. They're not really listening. I think listening is a big problem that we have in relationships, we have in business, we have in a whole bunch of different areas. But I'll say this to complement your point. Over the years, whenever I've been in rooms with people who I would deem as I look up to them, people I'd like to be like in my future career, very sharp businessmen, I always found that they were the person that talked the least in the room. But when they spoke, they usually spoke towards the end after they heard everybody trying to control the microphone. And when they spoke, everybody listened. I try to take a little bit of that. It's very difficult because whenever I'm in a group session, I want to be in the middle. I want to kind of, let's go. It's a group session. I want to engage. But the times where I've actually stepped back and listened during the first 3/4 of what was going on and then added value in the end, I felt like the value I was adding was stronger. And that speaks to a little bit of the always jumping in part of it as well.
I'll give you a pop quiz. I'm sorry if you won't pass. Just a fun pop quiz. Do you happen to remember the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership?
I don't remember all 21, no.
But do you remember the book?
Oh, yeah.
And do you remember the author? John Maxwell.
Yeah.
And what you just talked about is one of those 21 irrefutable laws. Do you happen to remember the law?
No.
The Law of Ef Hutton is what John Maxwell calls it. And it is when Ef Hutton talks, people listen. And that particular book is definitely a recommended book. Maybe we can have somebody on the podcast who speaks to some of those. But it speaks to the communication ability, much of what we learned from Jill Diamond today that we're grateful for, and the importance of getting a coach to help us be better communicators of the concepts that we have. And just love with her the match your communication style with your experience, because if your message is falling down, people are going to miss it all.